Thank you very much for that presentation, Louie. A lot of startling statistics, I have to say, and I know here in British Columbia, we just had one of the worst wildfire seasons here on record the other year, so I think you showed well that we can't just think about climate change as something that happens to other people in other countries. It unfortunately can and will happen to us right here at home, so thank you for that. I think that sets the tone well for the conversation we're going to have. And before we jump into it, Don, I'd like to ask you to maybe take a couple moments, introduce yourself, and talk a little bit about the work of the Insurance Bureau of Canada.
Sure. My name is Don Forgeron. I'm President and CEO of Insurance Bureau of Canada. I'm thrilled to be sitting in the same chair that Bob Rubin sat in. For a person of adequate age from growing up in Cape Breton, it's still a thrill to breathe the same air as the two Bobs earlier. Very interesting panel. We're the National Trade Association for Property Casualty Insurers. We insure your homes, your cars, your businesses. While I love to talk about insurance, and especially auto insurance, in BC, those of you from BC who want to talk about ICBC, maybe we could do that later. But I spend the vast majority of my time talking about this, talking about climate, the impact it's had and will continue to have, and all the issues associated with the globe event here, which is why we're one of the presenting sponsors, because we feel that strongly about this issue, its importance, not just to us as insurers, but to us as Canadians. And we were inspired a little while ago with the talk about the next generation. And I, Louie, share your sentiment that I do hope they're smarter than us and bail us out of the mess that we're creating. So that's a little bit about us.
Great, thank you for that, Don. Louie, we heard from you earlier, but maybe you want to take a moment as well to talk about you and your work.
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about the business. I think our business is a business where we rebuild what people lose. We are there when things are not going really well. We're there when people need help. And that's what motivates me there. I mean, to be in this business. I've been in that business for forever. I think it's one of the business that has the most impact on the life of the people, even though they don't realize it sometimes. And what Mr. Rubin said before, we are a business that is looking at climate change very closely. He says that many of the businesses are not looking at it. That has a direct impact on everything we do, on our business in general, on the way we discuss with our customers, with our brokers, and everything that's happening in climate right now. As Don was saying, it's for sure one of the most important topic of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Your conversation earlier really touched on the work you're doing to look ahead and sort of anticipate some of the challenges. So Don, I'd like to start with you. You're sort of at the intersection between the insurance industry and then really all levels of governments. That puts you in a really unique position and gives you a unique perspective on these issues. So maybe you can tell us about the innovation you're seeing in the industry and what that's going to do and how that's addressing some of the climate change challenges.
Sure, thanks, Haley. We could spend whatever time we have remaining talking about the innovations in our industry, because as Louie says, our industry has been consumed by this issue for a long time. Back in the early 80s, I believe it was Munich Re who sort of sounded the first clarion call for the business community to wake up and realize that this issue was serious, that it was a threat to their business, not just a threat in the sort of the historical sense that we had come to see it. And we've been on the front lines since then. We deal with wildfires, with droughts, with floods, with hurricanes, with tropical storms. We've been on the front line, so we're the canary. We've lived this for a long time, and so we've had a front row seat. So we've been motivated for a long time to want to do something about this. So for the benefit of those that don't come with an insurance background, who didn't join the industry right out of high school, there are probably a couple of things that we can do that I think are germane to the discussion here at Globe. One is the traditional risk transfer mechanism and what comes with risk transfer. And you heard one of the Bobs, talk about how organizations ought to be insuring against the risks that they're now beginning to identify. So with that risk transfer, we present to policymakers some really interesting market levers. That if you combine the market levers that our insurers can pull, and you combine that with good public policy, you can really change behavior. You can really incent people to change behavior, but you can also incent organizations to change behavior. And again, one of the Bobs said he goes to dinner parties with CEOs who talk about climate change, who then go back to work and forget about climate change and don't incorporate it into their business. Insurance is a risk transfer mechanism with the price signals it sends. So think of it this way. Think of it, you're a high-risk automobile driver, and you get your premium from your insurance company. How do you lower that premium over time? By becoming a better driver, by maybe taking driver education. It's the same with climate risks. If you're at a high risk for flooding, what are the steps that you can take? So a very, very important role that we can play there. But there's a secondary role that has not been well identified yet. And again, with good public policy, we can play a very, very important role in this transition to a low-carbon economy. And I know there's a couple of roundtables that we're going to be late for, where that's going to be discussed, where Minister McKenna is here today talking about that very thing. So a couple of I guess, educational moments, if you will, about how the role that our sector can play. On the innovation side, just a couple of quick examples. I think it was Swiss Re, just within the last year or so, insured a coral reef off of Mexico from damage from tourists, but damage from climate change. Our federal government, as part of the Paris Agreement, contributed $50 million towards a reinsurance pool in the Caribbean that helps those communities there return and build back from storms, but with a very interesting trigger as opposed to waiting for the storm and the damage and the assessment. It's called parametric, so a certain amount of rainfall or certain wind speeds trigger the payment, and some of those payments go towards actual resilience building. RMS and Swiss Re developed a framework for resilience bonds a couple of years ago that are growing in popularity. And green bonds, an area of real growth. I think in 2017, about $150 billion in green bonds, which was almost an 80% increase over 2016. So a huge area of growth. And lastly, I'll end just a little bit closer to home in terms of innovation, and it deals with the issue that Louie talked about, and that is a flood. 3 years ago, residential flood insurance was not available in Canada. And we talked a little bit, I think Louie mentioned the insurance gap between when an event happens, what's insured and what's not insured. On flood, it's not been insured, so we've relied on disaster payments from government. And those disaster payments come with no price signal, so there is no incentives for consumers to improve. The disaster payment comes, we rebuild to the same standards as we had before, we wait for the next event, and then we repeat, and that's been the cycle. So 3 years ago, our industry here in Canada brought flood insurance products to the market. We've also been instrumental in convincing the federal government to play a leadership role, and they held a roundtable this last November in Regina that brought all stakeholders together to talk about the issue of flood, and we are well on our way now to joining the other G7 countries who have a national flood program. And so it's been a very innovative approach to get everybody to the table, and the partnerships that it's created and the momentum that it has certainly has us excited.
Mm-hmm, that's great. Louie, you mentioned,
Yeah,
go ahead.
On the innovation side, there's I hope that going forward that people that want to disrupt businesses in general through using AI, machine learning, and deep learning will think about how can they disrupt the mindset of people in climate change mitigation and adaptation there. So I think there's a lot of work that's being done right now in using AI and all those new ways of doing things, using data to sell more, to do more things that are consumer facing there. I hope that there's going to be more effort to predict better, to try to define areas using that new technologies that will give consumer more information without thinking of capitalizing on it on this side. So I hope that there's going to be more work being done on that side, on the technology, on the new way of doing analyzing data.
Well, to that point, you mentioned you're personally passionate about these issues. One of your slides was insurance is about people, not things. But there are some people who might say insurers are really only in this because they care about the bottom line. So how do you respond to that?
You know what? I think bottom line is key. It's very important. First of all, to have an industry that is healthy, you need to build sustainability. You need to be able to pay claims in the futures. You want to make sure that you have solid organization, solid insurance company, but also solid government, because if we don't pay, it's the government that's going to pay. So the entire system has to be financially healthy. So yes, it's for sure we look at our bottom line. But at the same time, when we get up in the morning, I have to tell you there, we care about our 13,000 employees. We care about our 5 million customers. And we care about our shareholders. That's I would say, in order, the way we look at the world. And we want to be in business for a long time. We don't want to transfer all the cost to the consumer. We really want to try to find solution to those issues that will make, again, a long-term sustainable industry there. I think that is key. But for sure, we are looking at the bottom line.
Sorry, Haley, if I could just add, the easy thing for our industry to do on this file would simply be to raise your prices and continue to raise your prices until something changes, until the weather improves, until mitigation efforts begin to pay off. And you've seen some of those increases because, unfortunately, mitigation has not caught up yet with the deterioration in weather patterns and the increasing frequency and severity. So you've seen some of those price increases. But that would be the easiest thing for us to do, would simply be to pass on the cost of doing business to consumers. But I can tell you that my board, Louie, a member of the board, and 13 other industry CEOs here representing 80% of the premium volume in Canada, don't define that as leadership. Leadership is not simply passing on the problem for somebody else to solve. And they've challenged us as an organization and us as an industry to come up with solutions that are far-reaching, solutions that help the country as a whole, that help Canadians, and yes, in the end, ultimately help their bottom line, but to find a solution that's sustainable. And that's why we do spend as much time, energy, and effort and resources on this issue, because the issue of passing it on is really not a sustainable solution.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to stay on this topic of shifting mindset. There might be a lot of educated Canadians in this room who are familiar with what climate change is going to mean to them personally, to their communities, to the country. But there are many Canadians who don't really understand what it means. So Don, where do you think we need to begin? What should be done to try and foster greater understanding?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, and I think it lies at the very heart of how we solve this problem collectively. And one of the Bobs mentioned how awareness increased after the floods in Houston and the hurricanes in the Caribbean. But we forgot about Houston real fast as soon as the hurricane hit Florida. And I think there's a message in there that our memories are short and our motivations are as short as our memories. Partners for Action, which is an insurance industry organization out of one of the universities in Ontario, did a poll recently, and only 6% of Canadians who live in a flood zone identify that they lived in a flood zone. So they weren't aware that they lived in a flood zone. 20 or 21% of them felt that the likelihood of flooding would increase over the next 25 years. Awareness is incredibly low when it comes to the risks that we face as Canadians. The National Roundtable that I mentioned in November with Minister Goodale and stakeholders from across the country, the number one takeaway has been on the need to raise the awareness around risk that we as Canadians face. Because without raising the awareness around risk, you cannot motivate consumers to action. You cannot convince consumers as to why governments are making these types of investments if a consumer is not aware of that, because consumers may feel that this is the kind of investment that I need because this is what I'm worried about. They ought to be worried about these things. Businesses, while we're seeing an improvement, are not making those investments and those assessments because they're not aware of the long-term implications of these risks. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. We're encouraged on the narrow issue of flood, as big an issue as it is, that working in partnership with the government and with other organizations like Partners for Action and many others, that we can raise that level of awareness, and with awareness, we believe, comes action.
Louie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think on the company side there, I think we have to simplify how we do business there. We spend too much time on details, and we don't have enough time to discuss with consumer the real risk associated with that. So we have close to 140,000 people in Canada who are working in the insurance industry. And so we have a lot of ambassadors, people that can discuss with consumer what are the risks and maybe raise the level of awareness. But our processes, how complex it is to buy insurance, does not fit with that objective there. So we have to simplify our product, simplify the way we do things, better explain what the risks are all about, give the people the time to discuss that, improve our digital presence to give more information to customers on a timely basis. So we have a lot of work to do on that side, and I think we have a big part to play in raising that level of awareness. I also think that we have to, as an industry as a whole, improve our catastrophe response. So again, to make sure that we should also talk about that catastrophe response more. Mm-hmm. Let the people know what happened exactly, how we use those examples to create awareness, not just where it happened, but everywhere else. So when we talk about Slave Lake, when we talk about Fort McMurray, you talk to these things to Quebec or Ontario folks, I'm telling you the awareness of that is not very high. The understanding of what the insurance industry did or the risk associated with those events, it's not really well known. So I really think that we have to simplify our product, talk more about our catastrophe response. I would say that those are the two things that could bring and give more time to all the people that work in that business to discuss real risk with consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Haley, if I could just add, at the risk of falling out of favor with my team, if you want to visit our booth in the trade show area, so we're talking about raising awareness one Canadian at a time, or American, for our American colleagues. But for those of you who reside in Canada, visit our booth. There's an interactive map. You can pinpoint pretty much down to where your house is, the likelihood of a flooding event occurring over the next 20 to 100 years. So there, we've increased awareness already.
There you go. That's a great tool to have. I'm going to check that out after.
But we still have a lot of work to do on flood mapping.
Yes, we do.
Lots of work to do on flood mapping and understand really as an industry where the risks are. And again, I think we should use more the technology to address those risks.
We both touched on the importance of properly communicating risk. Louie, is it all about risk? Like, I know that's important in insurance, but do you see maybe on the flip side of things, opportunity to invest, opportunity to advance different causes?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that's our business. Our business is to identify risk and turn those risks into opportunity for us. That's what we do. We like to transfer risk or have the risk of the people transferred to us, and to make sure that we can better understand those risks. It gives us a chance to talk about those risks, and also it gives us the chance to price those risks. And we need a lot of information to price those risks. So lots of opportunity. But I think also as an industry we have an opportunity to raise awareness on climate change in general there, and help. Guys like the two Bobs that were there talking about the mitigation part of our organization, invest in ways that makes more sense. Try to promote the green bonds and all the other events that are happening in the economy right now to sustain and to better to promote climate change in general. So lots of opportunity as an insurer on the product side, on the underwriting side, but also because we know what we know, because we have a lot of data, I think we should also play a bigger role in informing industries where they should invest without, I would say, influencing those things ourselves, but at least having the information, because we gather a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's important to talk about it. It's also important to follow up talk with action. And Don, sometimes we hear that Canada's very rich on policy, but poor when it comes to operations and addressing climate change issues. What do you think might help get us closer to taking actions and ensure we're accountable?
In a word, leadership. It begins and ends with that on any file, across any sector, whatever sector of the economy you're talking about. I mentioned earlier the issue of flood, the only G7 country without a national flood program. I could reach the ceiling with studies that have been done, a lot of them by us, by other groups and organizations, and yet no action had been taken. And it's only until the federal government stepped up to the plate last year. There was a tremendous amount of work being done on this file, as there is on this file, on the issue of sustainable investing or moving to a low-carbon economy. There's an incredible amount of good work being done by so many groups and organizations, many of them represented here today. And on the flood file, we had 30 or 40 priorities. Well, if you've got 30 or 40 priorities, you don't have any priorities. And the federal government really was able to bring those groups together. Our roundtable, I'll get the numbers wrong, but I think we invited 60 people and 160 showed up. But what the federal government was able to do by taking this leadership role is very clearly define a small set of priorities that allowed organizations like ours and others to then be able to hone in on what is it that we can do. How can we leverage these priorities so that our contribution can be made greater? So as I said, the levers that we can pull with good public policy, now we're able to do that on the flood file. On the sustainable investment piece of the equation, there's been, again, a tremendous amount of great work being done in other jurisdictions. The EU, I think it's the high-level expert group, released an excellent paper on sustainable investing and providing a blueprint for how, as a continent, they might be able to approach this. We need that kind of leadership here in Canada. And I know the federal government is moving us in that direction, and I'm hopeful that this conference and more like it will provide the kind of momentum. But to me, it begins and ends with leadership, with someone standing up and saying, I'm going to be held accountable, I'm going to provide a roadmap, I'm going to provide that blueprint, and then groups and organizations able to plug into that.
Louie, this probably isn't going to apply to our audience here today, but there are some Canadians who don't believe in climate change and don't believe that the impacts we're seeing are caused by people. Should the sector weigh into that or wade into that, or should it remove itself and simply try and prepare Canadians?
Well, I think in being here as an industry there, I think we show, clearly that we believe that there's something going on out there. Our role as an industry is really to protect the people against the impact of climate change. That's our role. I think as we mentioned, we can bring data, we can bring proof. We're bringing proof of something is happening, for sure. When it rains, it pours. It doesn't rain anymore. When there's, I remember a few years ago we were talking about hailstorm in Alberta. There was one or two a year, and they happen every second years. They were strong every second year. Now we have 8, 10, 12 per season. So there's something for sure that's going on. And again we're trying really hard at providing the data, trying to find solutions, offering to customers some product that makes sense. And and I think we're here to show that we support the cause, that we want to for sure, like the Bobs were saying, the planet is changing rapidly. I think as all of us has a duty to do something to change that path for sure. And
We have 50 seconds left. I'd like to ask each of you in closing to maybe leave what you think is a key takeaway for our audience. They can walk out of here, they can learn something, the most important thing perhaps, as it relates to insurance and climate change in Canada. Don, let's start with you.
I'll come back to my last answer, which is leadership. We desperately need people to stand up, groups and organizations and governments, all levels of government. We need leadership on this file, whether it relates to our sector or to the country as a whole. We need some leadership. We need a roadmap. I think the motivation is there. The climate change horse has left the barn a long time ago. We can continue to have that debate, but I think our focus is elsewhere. But leadership is really the word that comes to me.
Thank you. Louie?
we have to act now there. There's no more time, seriously. I think it's definitely something that has to be happening now. Lots of stakeholders to influence. I think we are in a good position to be the link between many of them because we have some proof of what's going on.
Great. Don, Louie, thank you both so much for joining us today. A round of applause for our guest speakers.